Hello, and welcome back to the Oracle Parlor podcast. I hope you have your cozy cup of tea because we are about to get into it in this episode as we're discussing the word psychic. So, you've probably seen the word intuitive used a lot when folks refer to themselves and the work that they do as an intuitive reader or an intuitive session. So, I wanted to discuss today, what does it mean? And how does this differ from a psychic reader or a psychic session? So, before we dive into this, and before we get into, as the episode title, psychic is not a bad word, I just want to start by saying, as with all the episodes, please know that these are my opinions. And my opinions are based on my beliefs and my experiences. So, what I say today, much like all my episodes, may differ from what other people's might say or believe. And guess what? That's totally okay. And if you disagree with anything I have to say, that's also totally okay. Take what works for you and leave the rest. Because when it comes to the paranormal, when it comes to psychic, parapsychology, metaphysics, witchcraft, the list goes on. When it comes to these kind of topics, there is usually no solid yes or no answer. There's usually no clear indicator, and a lot of this is based off of belief and experience. So, with all that being said, I think the first thing that we need to kind of dive into is we need to answer the question of what's the difference between an intuitive and a psychic. But in order to do that, we really have to look at the words and what they mean and how they are defined. So let's look at their definitions. And like always, you can find links to all of my research or references in the description of this episode. So, from Oxford Languages, the word psychic relating to or denoting faculties of phenomena that are apparently inexplicable by natural laws, especially involving telepathy or clairvoyance. So, telepathy and clairvoyance, what is that? This is kind of like going through these layers and finding them out. Well, some of you may know what telepathy or clairvoyance is, and this is just an example that the Oxford Languages gives. But telepathy, clairvoyance, according to parapsychology, is known as an ESP. So, what's an ESP? It's extrasensory perception. According to Webster's dictionary, extrasensory perception is the perception, as in telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition, that involves awareness of information about events external to the self, not gained through the senses and not deductible by from previous experience. So again, we're seeing ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, psychic, telepathy, clairvoyance. So when we look at the word intuition versus uh, psychic or extrasensory perception, Webster's dictionary describes and defines intuition as the power or faculty of attaining direct knowledge or cognition without evident rational thought and inference. So, looking at psychic, looking at intuition, by definition, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of difference. They both are describing the ability in, to obtain knowledge without any kind of rational explanation. The ability to tap into something outside of ourselves, such as an extrasensory perception, an ESP, like telepathy or clairvoyance. For those of you who don't know what telepathy and clairvoyance falls under the category of what a lot of people like to say are the clairs. And again, when people refer to the clairs, you probably won't often, I'm not saying this doesn't happen, but you probably won't often hear people refer to the clairs as being psychic. They will often just be described as the clairs or um, intuitive awareness. But the clairs, as people like to call them, are part of extrasensory perception of psychic phenomena, of the psychic senses, as they are described. So, what are the clairs? We can get into the clairs in a whole other episode, and we shall. I'm sure we will. But let's just talk a little bit, at least, about clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is to simply know it, to simply have it. And I don't have the definition of clairvoyance here written in my notes, but it's to simply get that information and be like, I know it. I have it. Why? I don't know. From where? Who knows? But it's there. So we often, like I said, we will often see the clairs and these clair abilities used when referencing intuition and intuitive abilities. Yet, as we're talking, you can see that intuition has a lot of crossover with psychic. These words are pretty much meaning the same thing, but they're just slightly different. So, why is it that we don't see more people calling themselves psychic? There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons. Intuition is fairly more modern in the way that it is used. Intuition. Not saying that these words haven't been around for a long time, but the way that they're currently being used as a supplement, as an alternate use to the word psychic, we see intuition being used in its place. So instead of psychic readings, you get intuitive readings. Instead of I am a psychic, you get a lot of I am an intuitive. Now, I want to be very, very clear and say there is nothing wrong with using the word intuitive, but equally, there is nothing wrong with using the word psychic. It is just a matter of culture and how the words are perceived. Because intuition is used so often now as a replacement for the word psychic, it has become more culturally acceptable to say that one is intuitive, to say that one uses their intuition and has intuitive abilities and is an intuitive, rather than replacing all that with the word psychic. Psychic holds a lot of weight. Psychic holds a lot of negative connotations. Why is that? Well, we first have to ask ourselves, okay, what do I think of when I think of psychic? And I'm not asking modern you. Because if I was asking modern me, I know what I would say. I would say, well, obviously, a psychic is not a bad word. But if I asked, let's say, teen Jenny, the one who wanted to be a witch, the one that wanted to be psychic, even younger, if we asked kid Jenny, what's a psychic? What does psychic mean to you? When I say the word psychic, what do you think of? And chances are they probably wouldn't be very great responses. Things like snake oil salesperson and charlatan and con artist and a lot of these different other words for essentially people who are just trying to take your money and sell you something that is fake or non-existent, which is really unfortunate because there's a couple different reasons why this happens, or at least a couple of different reasons why I think today's culture and society has this negative connotation around the word psychic. So the first thing I want to say before I dive into the meat here is one of the reasons why I believe this tends to sway this way, unfortunately, is because of a lot of ignorance and racism, because oftentimes if you were to ask somebody to describe visually what a psychic looks like, you're going to get, unfortunately, a lot of racist stereotypes. And that stems from a lot of people thinking about Romani culture. Not great. A lot of people thinking of people who wear big gold hoop earrings or a turban or it's really disgusting, but this is all to say that these stereotypes of what a psychic looks like, should look like, should be dressed as, generally and typically stems from a culture, from a person, from a group, usually a minority, such as the Romani people. Because a lot of the practices of divination that the Romani people were doing to survive, are seen as people just trying to take money. Those things have been associated, those psychic things. Divination was considered a psychic thing, a thing that psychics did. Nowadays, divination is quite separate from psychic. Divination is a form of using our intuition. It's okay now, which is brilliant. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Oh, I love it. I love divination. I grew up doing nothing but divination and staying away from ghosts because I was scared of them, as you know. But the main fact here of this first point is that a lot of these cultures were stereotyped and looked down upon. And like I said, the Romani people were just trying to simply survive and thrive and exist and found the way to survive and thrive and exist through those practices. And unfortunately, if you don't know, please Google the slur word for Romani person, which starts with a G, which a lot of people don't even know. Or if they do, they're ignorant and or possibly even just ignore it, but still use it anyways. But there is a term that is actually derived from the Romani people. So I'm going to give a trigger warning because I'm going to say the word and I'm going to say the word that derives from it so you can understand where I'm coming from and why this is an issue. The Romani people are called gypsies. No, we don't use that word. And I'm sure you have heard of the term to be gypped. And some people don't honestly don't know this. And I've actually had to correct people on using this term and not using it at all because it is from a racist background, this really bad background. But to be gypped means that you were ripped off, and the word is an abbreviation for gypsy, which is a racist term that was used for the Romani people. So do you see how that's an issue, right? All in all, to say that when people think of psychics, they think of, oh, you're going to get ripped off. They're gypped, you know. Again, I'm going to stop using these words now because they're highly inappropriate. But do you see the kind of inappropriate lineage that branch that can be those dots that can be connected? And I'm not connecting dots because they're not connected. No, these are. We have to acknowledge these things. So it's unfortunate that a lot of that snake oil and charlatan and thievery stems from that place. But there's also another place that this stems from that is not just the Romani. But I wanted to acknowledge them first because that is so important and we don't want to just bypass that. But another reason why I believe we have this issue is actually stemming from the Victorian era. For anyone who doesn't know, the Victorian era was a booming era for psychics and mediums because at this point in time, and I believe we talked about this a little bit in a previous episode, but at this point in time during the Victorian era, There was a boom of spiritualism, is what it was called. Spiritualism was huge, and spiritualism involved communicating with the dead. Of course, it also involved other psychic phenomena, abilities, and so forth that were displayed and put on display for people to witness somebody using their psychic abilities. But more often than not, it was psychic mediums. It was people who could communicate with the dead. And the belief for this, the reason why this kind of happened, is because this was a time after the war, and a lot of people lost a lot of loved ones. And these people were desperate to connect with their loved ones, and they were desperate to have this affirmation that there was life continuing. And spiritualism gave them that. Mediums gave them that. And it was really a beautiful time for people to explore these avenues. And we have so much to thank the spiritualist movement during the Victorian era that we today, modern, we used still as intuitives, if we want to call ourselves intuitives, as psychics. The Ouija board, Ouija. Again, we've talked about this before, but that was something that really didn't come into popularity until all this kind of psychic communication with the dead did. Table tapping. Table tapping became popularized thanks to this movement. So there's a lot of really amazing and great things that came out of the spiritualist movement for parapsychology, for mediums today, for psychics and intuitives today, and for paranormal even today. There are a lot of researches and practices and ideas and beliefs that were done at that time. So that's all fine and dandy. However, during this time, we did see, unfortunately, a lot of people who were not honest and who were simply doing these things for attention. Now, this is not an opinion, this is a proven fact. Unfortunately, it is something that did happen. I'm not saying every psychic medium during the Victorian era, during the spiritualist movement at that time, was a charlatan or a fake or a phony or whatever. But it did happen, and it was quite a hot button topic at the time. It was hotly debated at the time. I'm sure you have heard of the magician Houdini. I am sure you know who Houdini is, and if you don't, Google him. But Houdini, famous, famous magician who could get out of straitjackets underwater and do all these amazing feats. But what was the one thing that Houdini and every credible magician at the time would say at the beginning of their show? I don't have the exact quote here, but essentially they would make sure that they were telling their audience everything that you see here today is an illusion. None of it is real. Everything that you see here today, none of it is real. It is all just an illusion. There is no real magic. They would specifically say this before every show to remind people that what they were doing was a creative act, a theatrical act, an art to convince you as the viewer, as the audience, that, oh my gosh, they really pulled a rabbit out of the hat. They really saw that person in half. And magicians were constantly one-upping each other and trying to come up with all these different amazing routines to convince the audience that they were doing magic while still telling them it's not magic. So why is this important? Why is Houdini important to this? Well, Houdini was convinced that not just one, not just a few, but every single psychic medium was a charlatan and a fraud and a magician wearing a mask. The biggest issue that magicians such as Houdini had with psychic mediums was the fact that the psychic medium was going into a performance and not telling people that it was a fake theatrical act. And that a lot of these magicians were indeed using or a lot of these psychic mediums were indeed using sleight of hands techniques that magicians would do on the rig, on the regular, on the daily, during their shows. But they were presenting it as a real experience with a spirit and a past loved one. This isn't to say that every psychic medium was doing this. Again, there are plenty of cases of really interesting stories that you can read of phenomena that people just cannot explain from their sessions with a psychic medium. Things from, items appearing out of nowhere and, hearing voices. Now, these can all be explained as well, but there are some cases that it's just very questionable, right? But I do honestly believe that this wave, this movement to disprove the psychic medium by magicians such as Houdini really was like a ripple effect of, you know, throwing a pebble in the pond. And back in the day, yes, it was hotly debated, but now it's created this wave, The word psychic was murmured, but people still believed a lot of psychics. And that little ripple effect turned into a giant wave, and now we are here. And the word psychic is, oh, very heavy, very large, bad. And this is why I argue. This is why I'm arguing. Psychic isn't a bad word. There are a lot of things that have happened in history that have attached the word psychic, the meaning of psychic, who a psychic is, to a lot of negative things. Because, yeah, magicians did pull the pants down on a lot of fake mediums who were absolutely using sleight of hand techniques. So now we have psychic as being this bad word. But I always like to play kind of devil's advocate here to give all sides and perspectives, but as best as I can, as you know. But even today, I'm not saying that this stuff only happened in the past with psychics and that it doesn't happen anymore. No, sadly, even today, there are many folks who call themselves psychic, who use the word psychic, but are very much not a believer in psychic abilities, in the paranormal, in the parapsychology, the metaphysical, or spiritual ideas that can come with being a real psychic. There are many people who are just looking to line their pockets and get paid. And I say this because I still see many psychic shops on the street that give off big red flags. Not to say every psychic shop on the street is, going to be a fake psychic, but you go to their websites and you can see all the red flags. So I do want to save that topic of red flag, green flag, of readers, psychics, and different readers. But I think that is such a big topic for another time. But the point here is that we still see, unfortunately, people who call themselves psychics, who give genuine psychics a bad reputation and bad name and continue to perpetuate the myths, the stereotypes, the negative connotations that still ride on that ripple effect into that huge tidal wave that we're currently dealing with of psychic's a bad word. It's negative. And as a practitioner, I have started calling myself a psychic witch because I want to dismantle the negativity surrounding psychic. I want to dismantle that. Now, it is hard because it's easy for me to say on my podcast. It's easy to say on my TikToks. It's easy to say in Los Angeles, where I am extremely privileged to be able to use the word psychic witch and not have terrible, terrible immediate repercussions because of where I live and the people I'm surrounded by. But if you go look on my website, there are definitely times where I intentionally avoid using the word psychic. And sometimes, depending on the location that I'm at, even though my business is called Phantasma Witch, my online handle is called Phantasma Witch, I may even not use the word witch. And it's not because I don't strongly believe and have strong convictions that witch and psychic are not bad words, but it is because I know that there are people who are sadly uneducated on what those words mean and what held beliefs of each individual who are using them. They just don't know. And from the unknown comes fear. And the last thing I want to do is scare somebody. So, yes, there may be times where someone will sit down with me and they will tell me that they are terrified to talk to me because I am a psychic witch. And there are misconceptions that a what a psychic and a witch can or cannot do. And it's all based around fear. And I like to tell them like it's okay to be afraid, but let's set the fear down and realize that, you don't have to be scared in this situation, especially. One of the common misconceptions I find when it comes to psychic and being a psychic, and I'm saying I find that this is a common misconception because I have worked many different locations. I have worked the popular Magic Market here in Los Angeles. I've worked at a cafe. I have worked at the Mystic Museum, a really popular, trendy little horror and occult shop in Los Angeles. I have worked at the Crooked Path in Los Angeles. I've worked at a crystal shop in Los Angeles. Like the list goes on. But the point here, and this is not a humble brag, I apologize, but the point is to say that I have worked many, many, many locations with all different kinds of people of all different kinds of backgrounds, from extremely esoteric and occult witchcraft to crystal lovers, light and love folks. And I still, today, out of the 9 years that I have been doing this professionally, I still have people who will sit down and tell me why they are so afraid of me as a psychic witch because of this common misconception, which is usually because this is the belief, I can either tell them when they're going to die. And I laugh because even if I could, even if I did intuit and psychically receive that information, honey, I would not tell you because that is unethical. And that is just going to cause you stress and anxiety. So there's the misconception that a psychic is going to know how you're going to die and when you're going to die. And a lot of people don't want to know that because it's very scary. And then the other common misconception that I have come across is you can read my mind and know all my deepest, darkest secrets. No. If I really wanted to know your deepest, darkest secrets, I would have to go on a deep dig in a deep mine, on a deep journey, do a lot of work to get to the bottom of it. And even at that, you've got your own energetic boundaries and protections that from your spirit team that you don't even know about. And it's just too much work. If you sit down at a table with a psychic, they are not going to immediately know your deepest, darkest secrets. That is not how that works. And that is one of the biggest fears that I find a lot of people have is that I'm going to know things. I'm going to know things that I shouldn't know. That's really inappropriate or that you don't want others to know. And this goes back to the red flag, green flag. where only an unethical psychic will intentionally dig for that information when they don't need to. It's not necessary, it's not part of the reading. So, we can dive into all this red flag, green flag, like I said, of readers and psychics in another episode, because I think that's very helpful for people to understand, both as a practitioner and as someone who goes and gets readings from others. But I do want to talk a little bit before we end on how I teach the difference between intuition and psychic, and intuitive and a psychic, because these words are so similar in meaning, yet one is so light and airy and okay to use today, while the other is very heavy. Now, again, this is just how I teach it, and this is how I understand it, and how I vocalize and verbalize it. So, how I like to describe it is intuition really is our baseline, natural, innate gut reaction, animal instinct that is in everyone. Yes, it's in everyone. And it's usually when intuition pops in, that it's just that it pops in. I call it the intuitive ping. Bing, little light bulb goes off, and all of a sudden you know something. You have insight on something. You're able to receive that information, but it's out of nowhere. It's random. It's sometimes about things that you don't even matter to you personally or are tangential to you. So it's just sort of like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this info? Versus psychic ability, which is intentional investigation to receive, to openly and intentionally receive, to sit down and ask to receive that information. So, again, the intuitive ping, you may be walking about, having yourself a nice little day, and suddenly you get an intuitive ping that you know that you're going to receive a very heavy text from a family member later that day or within the next 24 to 48 hours. Cool. At least that's my reaction to my intuition when I get that. I'm like, cool, great. Thanks for the heads up. Because the only thing I can do is prepare for that storm that's about to approach, right? It's like getting a little blip of a weather forecast of like, okay, this is in the energy. It's coming your way. Be aware. Okay. Out of nowhere. I didn't ask for it. Wasn't expecting it. Doesn't mean I don't appreciate it, but it's definitely boop, here and then gone. Versus if I sit down and I intentionally connect in and open myself up, and I ask to receive, and I connect with my psychic senses, aka the clairs, my intuition, and ask a question, or I try to receive information, such as, let's still use this family dynamic, right? Let's say I intentionally connect in and say, when will I receive word back from my family member? How will that conversation go? What is the energy around that? Should I brace myself for something intense? I'm intentionally tapping into my intuition. The intuition is random. It's up here. It's buzzing around us. It's flitting about. But with psychic awareness, we are actively engaging, reaching out, grasping it, and saying, ah, there it is. And it's mine now. And that's the information I was looking for. That's the main difference between the two. Listening to our intuition can be the first step to opening ourselves up to tapping into our psychic senses. Because it's one thing to get random pings and write them off and just kind of ignore it, because that's usually how it starts. Versus we get that random ping and then we go, whoa, 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 hold on. What was that? What was that? Where did that come from? What did I just receive? What does this mean? Let me write it down. Now, again, we didn't actively ask for that information. It popped up, but we listened. We became aware of it. We were mindful of it and we took note. And then the next step is to ask to receive it. Or let's say you get that intuitive ping, and the next step with our psychic awareness is to dive deeper and ask more questions and ask for more information using our psychic awareness, our psychic senses to continue that journey rather than letting it pop in and pop out. So, in the end, what word should you use? Should you use the word intuitive or psychic? Should you use the word intuitive ability or psychic ability or psychic sense? The answer is use what works for you. Use what feels best to you at any given moment. Because, like I said, I will absolutely take into account the people that I'm sitting with and reading for and their comfortability and my comfortability, how open they are and how open I am in that moment, where maybe I'll just use the word psychic casually because I understand that they understand. Or maybe I'm not sure, I don't know if they're going to understand, or I can tell that they're a little scared. Then maybe I'll just say intuitive. I'm not saying you have to throw away your own values or judgments or beliefs for other people's sake, and I'm definitely not doing that myself either. But I want to make sure that if people come to my space to interact with me, that they are going to feel comfortable and safe to some capacity without completely throwing my beliefs out the window. So I'll just swap words. Psychic, intuitive. I'd like for society to get to a point where we can say psychic, psychic senses, psychic abilities without the gut punch reaction from others. But we're not at that point yet. So, what can we do in the meantime? We can educate folks, we can explain to folks gently, just like I am in this podcast. But we don't have to force people to be okay with it. We don't have to force people to use what we think is best, which is why I'm saying use what works best for you. If the energy of psychic is just too heavy when you say it, when you use it, don't use it. If intuitive doesn't feel quite right, then don't use it. Use what resonates. Use what makes you feel comfortable. So, like I said, my references will be linked in the episode description for you all. If you have a question or a spooky story for the podcast, you can email oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. I am hoping to start getting stories and questions that I can share on the podcast. That would be lovely to end the episode on. If you want to learn more, you can join me over on Patreon. I do monthly magical workshops over on Patreon. I also have free content, so you can join as a free member. You don't have to be a paid member. There's questions and answers. There are behind the scenes. I also do tarot quick pulls over on my Patreon, which is available to everyone, whether or not you are a paid member. And at the end of every month, I do a live stream of tarot scopes in which I pull a tarot card for each zodiac sign for the energetic forecast of the month ahead. You can catch that on YouTube. You can watch the recordings on my YouTube, but they will also be directly streamed to my Patreon as well. If you'd like to book a reading with me one-on-one or a consultation, an intuitive psychic consultation with me one-on-one, you can absolutely do so at my website, phantasmawitch.com. That's phantasmawitch.com. And then, of course, if you aren't already watching this video on YouTube, you can find me at Phantasma Witch at YouTube. You can also find me at Phantasma Witch on Instagram, which I'm not sure how long I'll be there. I keep saying that, but who knows? And you can also find me over on Blue Sky. Thank you all so much for joining me for yet another episode in the Oracle Parlor. I'll see you next time.